the Star Democrat in the 1920s, I think it was called a Star Democrat then, actually referred to Unionville as the ideal Negro community in the state of Maryland, quote unquote. And you know what it was, and it still is. It's an idea, and so is Copperville. And Copperville came as a result of a split in the church at St. Stephen's in 1872. St. Stephen's had a difference of opinion, which all churches do, and all families do, and all they have a difference. And some of the congregates of Unionville St. Stephen's Church left and lived in the Copperville area. And John Copper and DeShields and the rest, they started a new church called St. Matthew's United Methodist in Copperville. But both of these communities were anchored by their church. And they were anchored by their spirituality, and they're anchored by their family, and they're anchored by community. And they all had jobs, and some of these jobs were not good jobs, and they were rough jobs, but they all had work because they were in agriculture. And they came together every Sunday morning, and they sang the spirituals and they sang the gospels, but they stayed together as a family and a community. And today we see in these churches, particularly Unionville, we see the graveyard, we see the cemetery, and we see that the spirits of the ancestors are there. Well, in my book on Unionville and St. Stephen's, I wanted to do two things. First of all, I wanted to use Unionville as ground zero to tell the story of African Americans in Talbot County, which is what I did. I really go all the way back to 1634 when Maryland was founded, and the first African American, the first black person who walked the shores of Talbot County, I was able to trace him back to Matthias de Souza in the 1640s. He was the first African American that we know of to walk Talbot County. And then I took that and I expanded it to all the 8 or 9 small African American communities in Talbot County. And I used Unionville as a base to expand that whole black history. In West African spirituality, one never dies. When one passes away, we say, in our terminology, we say they join the ancestors. And when they join the ancestors, they go into a spiritual community. And that spiritual community is always available to those who are willing to listen and learn from the ancestors. And so when you go to the Unionville Cemetery, you'll notice that all of the original founders are lined up in a straight line along the back of the cemetery. And it's as far east as possible to go on their property. What does that mean? And if you look at where they're buried, their head and their heart is as far east as possible. They were purposely laid there to be as close to Africa. And that's why they were buried. And they believed that the closer to Africa, the closer they were to their ancestral spirits. What we see in Unionville, what I try to do with my book, is I try to show all the very many ways that Africanisms and African traits and cultural traits continued in America even through the horrors of slavery and Jim Crow. And we see that where? We see it through spirituals, we see it through music, we see it through dance, we see it through hairstyle, we see it through burial rites. The more you sing, the closer to God you are, because the more you sing, the more spiritual you become. And the more you sing, the closer to God, the more the Spirit infuses you to keep going and to keep alive and to have hope. You know, by the time we got to 1860, Talbot County's blacks were 50% free. This is slave territory. This is slave agricultural territory. It's a long, long history of very violent slavery in Talbot County, on the Eastern Shore in general. But by 1860, 50% of African Americans in Talbot County were free. What that means is that that 50% who weren't free are saying to themselves, hey, listen, if Joe over here down the street, if Joseph is free, why can't I be free? I'm going to get free. Somehow, some way, I'm going to get free. Either my family's going to buy my freedom, or I'm going to work a little plot of land and buy my own freedom, or else I'm going to run away, which is what a lot of people did. Hello. But by the time the Civil War comes around, African Americans are literally running away and joining the Union lines. Not necessarily in the Eastern Shore, but they're running away and going to different, particularly in the South, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina. They're running away and joining the Union lines and becoming free that way. But in Talbot County, the planters began to realize that the value of their enslaved people was getting lower, was becoming less and less valuable. And so by 1863, these 18 men, half of them were sold to the federal government by the Lloyd family. They were sold into the government for $300 each. Now, it was better to get a $300 sale from Isaac Copper in Unionville than to wait for him to run away to join the Union Army and he'd get nothing from it. So these 18 men in 1863, in May and June of 1863, went into the Union Army. They were sold into the Army. And a couple of them actually ran away and joined the Army. By 1866, they are mustered out of the Union, and lo and behold, they all come back to Unionville, which is an incredible story in and of itself. As a matter of fact, 6 of them were mustered out in Indianola, Texas, 1,629 miles away. And guess what? They walked back to Unionville. And Cogglesville was named for the owners of the land, John and Ezekiel Coggle. Well, the 18 men had the wherewithal and the intelligence and the vision to go, you know, the Coggles did not give us our freedom. The Union Army gave us our freedom. We're changing the name of Cogglesville to Unionville. I think right therein lies the amazing idea of freedom and struggle and hope and community and history. Yeah, the Coggles were Quakers. They were not bad people at all. John and Ezekiel, they were good people. They gave each of the 18 men an acre of land for $1 a year. And they wanted to make it an official transaction. So it cost them $1 a year. And then they gave them 2 additional acres, one for a church and one for a school. And voila, a church and a school. It's exactly what you need. They built a church and they built a school. And here in today we have Unionville. I would like to bring Unionville to the front lawn of the Talbot County Courthouse, because Unionville really is tucked away. I mean, it is tucked away between the Miles and the Wye Rivers, and it's way out there in the middle of the country, and nobody really goes to Unionville. And ironically, the top name on the Confederate Soldiers of America statue is Admiral Franklin Buchanan. And Buchanan lived just a baseball throw across the river in Unionville. And he was a first-rate trader. He's not just a Southerner, not just a admiral of the Confederate Navy. He was a trader to the United States of America. And then he took in Jefferson Davis for about a half a year, lived on his estate after the Civil War in recuperation. And that is just that's walking distance to Unionville. I would prefer a monument to all the soldiers as well as to the tens of thousands who were enslaved and never made their names in a history book, who were always called Henry or George, and that was not their name. But it was always Henry or George. Henry, pick up this. George, go get that. And nobody really knew their last name. That's the monument I want to see. The reason I would keep the CSA up is because I think it's a learning experience. That's why. Keep it up. Let's have a dialogue. And I'm not going to vilify those soldiers, because we just had that conversation about most of them did not know what they were doing. I want a conversation about the other soldiers and about how people like Unionville actually built America.